Okay, everybody, welcome to the evening lecture, and I especially want to welcome those who are joining us online, folk, I guess, from all around the world, and just wanted to say a few things about Capernwray. We are a Bible school in the north of England, just south of the beautiful Lake District. We have 158 students for winter school, and probably while the lecture's going on, you'll be looking out for somebody that you know. It was interesting this afternoon. I came in to the lecture hall, and Abigail was talking to her dad in New York. And I thought, I'm going to listen to what she's saying. I thought she's probably saying, this is a brilliant lecture, Rob's incredible, it's just awesome. And what she was saying was, Dad, I'm going to be sitting on such and such a row, and I'm about 3 in from the end, so you should see me at some point. I wonder how many of others of you are hoping that your mums or dads will see, if you could put your hands up. Okay. Woo! Well, we're going to have a great time. Let me just introduce this lecture series for our friends online. We are working our way through 1 Samuel. We began in 1 Samuel chapter 16, and we're going to be working right the way through to the end of this fantastic book. And we are looking at a particular period in David's life. In 1 Samuel chapter 16, God, through Samuel, calls David to a future assignment, to be the king of Israel and Judah. And scholars debate how old David was in 1 Samuel 16. He's probably somewhere between about 12 years old and 16 years old. And it's not until he is 37 and a half years old that he actually steps into that which God began in 1 Samuel 16. And so what we're doing is tracking David over this 20-year period or so, and we're calling this series Getting the King Out of the Boy. And we're looking at the training program that God put David through that quite literally nearly killed him on several occasions. Some of the events that happened to him, God organized. Some of the things that happened to him, God simply allowed. But they were designed to turn David into the person that God wanted him to be. And we've come now to 1 Samuel chapter 25. And the subject that we're going to look at, and I've only ever heard one person ever speak on this in my 50 years of being a Christian. And the subject that we're looking at is the subject of blind spots. See, there are certain things in the Bible that if they weren't in the Bible, we would probably find it hard to believe. They're so out of character. They're so left field. You read them and think, well, boy, I never saw that coming. And in 1 Samuel chapter 25, that is exactly what happens with David. Now, most of our students, I hope, have read through the chapter sometime this afternoon. Hope springs eternal in the heart and all that. For those who haven't, I'm going to summarize the chapter rather than read it. It's just time is precious, and I want to get into the text. In 1 Samuel chapter 25, David very courteously sends 10 men to ask a guy who's, we would say today, extremely wealthy, a man called Nabal. David sends 10 of his men to ask Nabal to pay him for the protection that David's men have been giving to the flocks of Nabal. And Nabal is incredibly contemptuous and rude in the response he gives to these 10 men. They go back, tell David, he basically told us to get lost. David goes into meltdown, and he arms 400 of his men. He arms himself, and they head out to kill every single male in the household of Nabal. The focus then in 1 Samuel 25 switches to Nabal's wife, and she's called Abigail. Abigail, we're told 2 things about her in the text. Number 1, she's very beautiful, and number 2, she's very intelligent. And when Abigail hears what her crazy husband has done, she decides she needs to do something. So she gets loads and loads and loads and loads of food, loads the stuff on donkeys, and sends lots of her servants with the donkeys ahead of her, and then right at the back, she's on a donkey. So imagine David and his armed men are heading down towards the household of Nabal, and all this food keeps arriving. And there's another donkey and another donkey and another donkey. And then eventually the donkey comes along that has Abigail on it. And she apologizes profoundly to David. David repents of what he was going to do. You think that's the end of the chapter, but then there's this kind of twist at the end. And what happens at the end of the chapter is that Abigail, when Nabal is sobered up because he's been totally drunk, when he gets sober, she tells him what's happened, and he has some kind of medical episode, and several days later he dies. And then the next event, violin stage left, is that David and Abigail get married. Okay, so that's what we're going to look at. We're looking at the subject of blind spots, and we're going to look at 4 things about blind spots. We'll look at 2 or 3 this evening in the 2 sessions that we're having, and then the next 2 sessions we have in this series, or the next 1 session we have in this series, we'll be finishing this particular subject off. And just let me encourage the folk online that we are going to put available for you online all of these lectures on getting the king out of the boy, so you'll be able to catch up on them and find out what comes after this. So here are the 4 things we're going to look at. First of all, we're going to look at the reality of blind spots in your life and my life. Like I said a moment ago, I never heard anybody speak on this apart from one person. Do you remember sometimes I have that red flashing light that I put on top of the podium and I fire it up and I say this is signaling that 95% of Christians have never looked at this subject. And I would be willing to bet that 95% of people listening to this tonight have never heard any teaching from the Bible on the very, very important subject of blind spot. So we're going to look at the reality of blind spots. And then secondly, and I think you'll find this fascinating, we're going to look at the reasons for blind spots. Why there are things about you that you, and about me, things about you that you don't know, that lots of other people looking at you do know, but even if they told you, you wouldn't believe them. So we're going to look at the reasons for that. And then the third thing we're going to do, and this will probably be not this evening, we're going to look at the rationalization for blind spots. How good we are at explaining them away. How good we are at saying, no, you obviously haven't realized how fantastic I am yet. And then finally, we're going to have a look at the recognition of blind spots. So, getting into the subject, let's first of all just look at the text and see what David was planning to do. David seems to me to be fired up on testosterone because he is determined to slaughter every male. Now, I don't know enough about Hebrew to know if that's every adult male or if it included teenagers or what. But all it says in the text, in the English text, in every version I looked at, he's determined to butcher every male. Let me just read a few verses. 1 Samuel 25 and verse 12. David's men turned round. These are the guys who've been to Nabal, and they went back. When they arrived, they reported every word. In other words, Nabal's saying, get lost. You cannot be serious. I'm not going to pay you. Who is this David? Coming from who knows where. They go back and they report this to David. David said to his men, put on your swords. So they put on their swords. David put on his. About 400 men went up with David, and about 200 stayed with the supplies. And then verse 22, all of this, unless I say otherwise, is in chapter 25. Verse 22, David said, may God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him, i.e. Nabal. And then in verse 34, this is when David is talking to Abigail. If you had not come quickly to meet me, not one male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive by daybreak. However you look at this, this is horrendous. And we're going to see in a moment that what David was planning to do was absolutely the opposite of the will of God for him. Now, the other thing that we need to notice is that this is so out of character for David and for the place that this occurs in Scripture. I'm going to come out with something that is hugely profound. So fasten your seatbelts, okay? Here it comes. Chapter 25 of 1 Samuel has before it chapter 24. And it has after it chapter 26. So what is the context for this event? Well, let me just remind you of what happened in 1 Samuel chapter 24. Saul, who's been taking out conscripts and things on David, he's been getting people to promise to kill David. He has been throwing javelins at David. David has been on the run for years. And in 1 Samuel chapter 24, David and his men are hiding in a cave. And not to put too fine a point on it, Saul comes into the cave to relieve himself. And David, it must have been a massive cave, and Saul's come out of the midday sun, can't see very well in the gloom. And David's men are saying to him, what part of this do you not understand? This is the day the Lord told you about. He's handed your enemy into your hands. Kill the guy. And David tiptoes up behind Saul with a razor-sharp knife, and instead of slitting his throat, he cuts part of his robe off. Now, if you look at different translations, they say different things. Some of them say he cut the hem of Saul's robe off. Others say they cut part of the robe off. Others say they cut a corner of the robe off. I don't know how much of the robe he cut off. So Saul, when he's finished doing what he's been doing, walks out with part of his robe missing at the back. Now, I don't know how much was missing at the back. I remember going to a National Health Service hospital in the United Kingdom for some tests, and they put this kind of hospital gown thing on you, and the buttons are at the back. And the good old NHS, half the buttons are missing, so you're kind of walking around wondering what's visible to the watching millions. Well, I'm not too sure, what people were doing as Saul walks past them, whether they're trying not to laugh or whatever, but David's heart convicts him. And from the safety of the cave, he apologizes to Saul for what he's done. That's 1 Samuel chapter 24. What's 1 Samuel chapter 26? After this chapter. 1 Samuel 26 is, in some ways, a rerun of chapter 24. Because Saul has brought out, I think it's 3,000 men, can't just remember, but you'll see it in the text, to kill David. And they're camped in the valley, and David's over here on a hillside. And he decides to creep down into Saul's camp. And he takes with him Abishai, who is a killing machine. Most of the time you find Abishai in the Old Testament, he's either killing somebody or planning to kill somebody. And he goes down with David, and they tiptoe into the camp, and they stand over Saul, who's asleep. And his javelin is stuck in the ground at the side of him. And Abishai picks up Saul's javelin and says again to David, in effect, what part of this don't you understand? Here's the guy who's been trying to kill us. Let me pin him to the ground. I won't need to strike twice. I can kill him with one blow. Then David sticks out his hand and stops him. Those are the chapters either side of chapter 25. You come to chapter 25, and David, who has been generous-hearted and kind and forgiving and full of grace, now morphs into this guy who is mean, who is overreacting, who is harsh, who is deciding to slaughter every male. Most of these guys are innocent, every male in the household of Nabal. Why? Answer, because of a massive blind spot. And I wonder if you know Christians who in many areas of their life are fantastic, but then you stick them in a particular situation and this kind of monster emerges, and they're nothing like Jesus, and they don't even realize that they've changed. Blind spots are real, and they are deadly serious. Now, it is true that David later realizes that doing what he was planning to do would have been tragically wrong. He realizes it when Abigail comes out and speaks to him. And so in 1 Samuel 25, verse 30, this is what Abigail says to David. She's kind of prostrated herself on the floor in front of him. She's incredibly wise in the way she talks to this guy who's all fired up and ready to kill somebody. She says, turn away, don't do what you're planning. And here's what she says, 1 Samuel 25:30, my master will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or of having avenged himself. She says what you were planning to do was wrong. You were planning on avenging yourself. You were planning on shedding needless blood. And you were in danger of having a staggering burden on your conscience. In the Second World War, there was a man who was in charge of the Allied forces, and his name was called Field Marshal Montgomery. And I'm told that when he was dying, many years after the war, and people were going in to help him, he just kept saying over and over and over and over again, with great remorse, all those young boys killed. All those young boys killed. As he realized all the young men that he'd sent out to battle and they'd been killed. Now, we're not judging him for that, but this was on his conscience. And when he's dying, it's troubling him. And Abigail is saying to David, if you'd have gone ahead with what you were planning to do, you would have just been living with a staggering burden on your conscience. The thing that hits me just looking at this is that the Lord doesn't show us all of our faults at the same time. I wonder if you have realized that. If you're anything like me, you know loads and loads of faults in your own life. You know areas where, I need to sort this out and I need to sort this out. But there will be things in your life, as there is in my life, that you don't even suspect are there. But they are wrong. Now, how do we know that what David was planning to do was wrong? See, as far as his culture was concerned, what he was planning to do was okay. As far as he was in tune with his own conscience, what he was planning to do was okay. As far as all of his companions were concerned, everything was lovely and rosy in the garden. So how can we say David was wrong in what he was planning to do? We can say he was wrong because of a very simple thing. What he was planning to do was not like Jesus. Do you remember we've seen this again and again and again and again and again? If I want to know what God is like, I take a long look at the Lord Jesus. And David planning to murder every male in the household of Nabal was completely wrong. Now God does show him through Abigail that what he was planning to do was wrong. But I wonder if you've noticed anything else in David's life that's a bit weird at this moment. Let me read you the last verses in 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse 42. I kind of referenced it, but I don't know if you noticed anything about it. Abigail quickly got on a donkey and, attended by her 5 maids, went with David's messengers and became his wife. Violin, this is lovely. Just hang on a minute. David had also married Ahinoam of Jezreel, and they both were his wives. He'd also married Michal, the younger daughter of Saul. So David has got at least 3 wives at this moment. Is that okay? Is that not okay? Of course that's not okay. And so the thing that hits me is, don't assume that everything in the Old Testament is in line with God's perfect moral will. When you send missionaries to some pagan tribe, very often the missionary has got to infiltrate that group of people. And if they walk in and say, this is wrong, that's wrong, sort this out, that's no good, that's hopeless, that's unacceptable, they'll finish up dead very quickly. What missionaries have to do is to infiltrate a tribe and very often not point out all the things that are wrong until they gain the trust and the ear of those people. And it seems to me that in Scripture, God enters cultures and he's not always pointing out everything that's wrong in a culture. So, what I want to suggest is that if David could have blind spots, then so can Rob Whittaker, and so can you. Now, our blind spots will not be slaughtering innocent people like David was planning to do, because we're in a different culture. And in our culture, some of the stuff that was okay in the semi-barbaric days of the Old Testament is not okay. But I wonder in how many churches stuff goes down that is just plain wrong. The way we act, the way we react, the way we gossip about somebody, the way we respond in certain situations. And everybody we know acts like that. Everybody we know responds like that. Our mum, our dad respond like that. Our friends respond like that. And yet, for those of us who are seeking to walk with Jesus and please him and allow him to live his life through us, the way we are acting and reacting and responding is absolutely unacceptable. But it's a blind spot. You see, blind spots don't just affect individuals. Blind spots can also affect entire groups of people. I wonder if you've ever thought of that. I wonder if you've ever entertained the thought that your church back home might have massive blind spots and nobody even realizes it. I wonder if you've ever entertained the idea that entire denominations can have blind spots. We can be really strong and really straight and really black and white on all kinds of things, but there are other things that we're grey and not quite sure and all the rest of it. And people looking in think, how can those guys be so right in so many areas and so wrong in some areas? My own view is that entire movements can have blind spots. Torchbearers around the world will have blind spots. Evangelical Christians will have blind spots. I'm not trying to win any friends. I'm just trying to apply what we're looking at in Scripture. If David, a man after God's own heart, and in the New Testament it says of David, the Lord says of David, he'll do everything I ask him. If David can have this massive blind spot, might it be possible that you do, and I do, and our churches do, and our movements do? Christian leaders can have blind spots. You know, I'm sure some of you have sat listening to me, and some of the things I've said, you've winced and thought, Rob, how could you say that? I love your teaching, but then you throw away one of these lines, and it doesn't just sit right with me. Well, it probably isn't right. You know, when I listen to Bible teachers, when I was your age, I used to listen to Bible teachers, and I used to be whipping myself. I used to be thinking, I don't think he should have said that. I don't think that joke was appropriate. I don't think the way he responded to that student who was talking in the lecture was a way that a man of God should respond. And then I'd be thinking, but what am I? Who am I? What do I? Now I look back with 50 years kind of, life, and I think, no, that was the wrong way of handling that situation. How is the way that we become aware of our own blind spots? Answer by getting out a bit more. Answer by moving outside of our little circle of security. And I've said this to you again and again and again and again and again. Read books by people you disagree with. Listen to people online that you disagree with. Try and understand their views before going, la, 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 la. Don't talk to the face, talk to the hand because the face ain't listening. I don't know whether I mentioned this to you before. I don't think I did. But I was listening fairly recently to some brilliant discussions. They weren't arguments or debates. They were discussions between Jordan Peterson and a guy called Sam Harris. Sam Harris, a brilliant intellectual, and he's, I think, a neurologist or something. He understands how the brain works. And you've heard me talk about Jordan Peterson before. And they had these discussions. First of all, they had, I believe, 2 in Canada. And then they had 1 in the United Kingdom, in England, and then 1 in Southern Ireland, in Dublin. And the way they began most of those discussions was fascinating. They were on a stage. There were hundreds, if not thousands of people in the auditoria. And the way they began, the person who was facilitating the discussion, first of all, said to Jordan Peterson, Can you explain to me clearly the concerns that Sam Harris has about your views? Can you explain why he genuinely thinks you're wrong and the issues that he thinks you haven't grappled with? And then he turned to Sam Harris and asked the same question about the person, Jordan Peterson, opposite him. I want to suggest it is so important that we don't put our fingers in our ears and never listen to anybody from a different denomination or a different stream of Christianity who has a different view than us. It's possible that they are targeting some of our blind spots. So what I want you to do, and I think you'll enjoy this, I want to look at the different reasons for blind spots. And I want us just to have a little bit of fun, okay? And those of you watching online, you know, you're going to need some paper and pencil and stuff, and maybe do this in your living room, and I hope you enjoy it. One of the things that Jesus often did was to build a bridge between the familiar and the unfamiliar. He would build a bridge between the known and the unknown, and he did that with his parables. He would tell stories about areas of life that people were comfortable with, and then he would draw conclusions and build a bridge over into an area that perhaps was new for them. And blind spots occur in many areas of life. And what I want us to do is just look at some of the areas of life where we have blind spots, ask why we have them, and then say, now, is there a link from that to perhaps blind spots in my walk with Jesus, in my spiritual life? And so I want to suggest that the first reason for blind spots are the way that we are made, the way that we are designed. Now, I'm doing my best now to describe your eye. And if there are some of you here who are doctors, etc., please forgive me. I'm giving this my best shot. In a healthy eye, I will have a blind spot. Just think about your eye almost as a camera. And in your eye, first of all, you have a pupil. You have something that opens when it's dark and closes when it's bright light to limit the amount of light coming into your eye, just like an old-fashioned camera. You then, in your eye, have a lens. And that lens has, I think they're called ciliary, but I'm not sure, muscles at the top and the bottom. Is that right or wrong? Thank you. Somebody's saying yeah. All round. And it can stretch. It can make the lens thin, or it can allow the lens to be fatter. And as the thickness of the lens changes, so the focal point of the lens changes. It bends light a lot or a little. And that bent light is then focused onto the retina, which is the back of your eye. And the retina is full of light receptors. And I don't understand this next bit, but the light falling on the back of your eye is transmitted through the optic nerve into your brain, where it's processed and you have the sensation of seeing. Well, here's the big idea. Where the optic nerve comes out of your retina, at that part of the retina, there are no light receptors. That is a blind spot on the back of your eye. Now, I'm going to illustrate that for you, and you're going to see your own blind spot. So what I'd like you to do, please, on a piece of paper, is to draw a cross, and about 4 inches to the right, draw a circle that you fill in. So about 10 centimeters to the right, separate a cross and a circle. Are you training as an optician or what? Sorry, a doctor. Woo! Hey, well, if I get something really wrong, start doing this to me. Okay. Okay, when you've done that, okay, do it real quick. We're not painting the Sistine Chapel, just a cross and a circle. And then try and imagine that your left eye is kind of opposite the cross and your right eye is opposite the circle. Then it's really important you do this now. Close your left eye. If this was my wife, she'd be saying, which is my left eye? Close your left eye and look at the cross. Don't move the paper. So now you're going a bit cross-eyed. With your right eye, you're looking at the cross. And now move the paper slowly towards you, not looking at the circle. And you will see at one point that the circle disappears. Okay, continue moving the paper towards your eye, and the circle will reappear. All right, here's the next experiment. Shh. All right, that's the point at which the light from that circle is falling on the optic nerve at the back of your eye. So there's a blind spot. All right, now I'm not going to tell you what happens with this. I want you to do this again. I want you to now draw either side of the circle, but not touching the circle. I want you to draw 2 lines. And then I want you to repeat exactly the same experiment. Remember, your right eye is supposed to be facing the circle. Your left eye is facing the cross. You're closing your left eye, then you're looking a bit cross-eyed with your right eye at the cross, and you're moving slowly towards it. Tell me what happens now, because something else happens. Sorry? Something else very interesting happens. Sorry? I'll tell you what happens if you do it properly. You now have a continuous black line. Okay, I'll show you the same experiment. It's just the same thing, but for some people it works a little bit better. You may not have the colours for this, but if you were to do it using this method, again, close your left eye, look with your right eye at the cross and move slowly towards it, you'll see something else happens. You'll see now that that big yellow circle becomes a solid yellow circle at the point of your blind spot in your eye. So the big idea with this is very interesting. Blind spots don't only stop you seeing things, they convince you there's something there that isn't there. Our brains are designed so they like patterns, they like symmetry. And people with blind spots see things that aren't there. Here's David, whoa, wanting to slaughter every male in the household of Nabal. Now, just so you know, I'm not making this stuff up. Every year I have my eyes tested. It's kind of exciting. We used to have this old doddery guy who checked our eyesight out. I think he was about 90 years old. He looked like he'd got one foot in the grave and the other on a banana skin. And he was kind of doddering away, looking at your eyes. And then one time I went to the optometrist and he wasn't there. And he'd been replaced by this absolutely gorgeous young woman. And it was a little bit kind of scary because I'm sitting there. I don't know if they all do this, but she sits with her nose about 3 inches from your... This is before anything's happened, before any eye tests or anything. She's sitting there like this, and I'm thinking, what's going on here, and how are you doing? And, okay, thank you, and things are looking up at the moment. And you're having this conversation. And when she starts testing my eyes, she said to me, could you look to the right? And my word of honor, I forgot which way was right. I'm thinking, what's that about? Well, they take a picture like this every year, and that little kind of white spot in the middle, that little pimple thing in the middle, that's my optic nerve. If any of you are doctors, you'll see other things about me as well. It's very revealing looking at the back of someone's eyes. Do you know what that says about me? I'm not going to pick on you, you're okay. Oh, well, it says that at the time I had that done, I had high blood pressure. I don't now, so there you go. All right. So, probably because of the optician, but anyway. Why have I gone into this? The first reason we have blind spots is because of the way that we are made. Hello? Your DNA is responsible for you having certain blind spots as you look at life. One time I was on a course, and it was kind of a leadership training course, and one of the brilliant ideas they had was they had us playing games. And so we had to get into teams, and it was a bit competitive and play games. And one of the crazy games we were playing was Pictionary, you know, and we were trying to, the team I was on, were trying to do this. We were really intense, and the guy on the other team, or one of the guys on the other team, kept saying, "This is the game that fools everybody. The clock's ticking, only 20 seconds to go, only 10 seconds to go." And I felt like punching this guy in the face because he was just being obnoxious. But being a Christian, I didn't, okay? Now we change sides. Now his team's trying to do it. Now it wasn't me who was doing this, but another guy on our team started to say, "These are the games that people fear. The clock's ticking, 20 seconds to go." This guy on the other team erupted. Boom! "Shut up," he said. "We're trying to do this game. I can't believe you're doing this." And I'm thinking, and I can't believe that you're getting angry at exactly the same thing you were doing to somebody else 30 seconds ago. We all have blind spots in the way that we are made. I have a friend who, I'm not going to tell you what they debate. This guy's a leading Christian, and he debates other Christians about a subject that I'm not going to say. It would take us off down the wrong road. And he says to me, "Rob, before we have the debate," and they're on a platform and lots of people there, he says, "I usually go into the other little changing room and I say to the guy, 'Can we pray together?' And he says, he looks at me and thinks, 'We'll pray together?' What? He says, but I pray anyway." He says, "Then we go out and I'm trying to answer the questions and issues that he's raising." And he says he genuinely cannot see them. And my friend said, "I'm sure when he dies, if they did an autopsy, there's part of his brain that ain't connected up." He said, "You can present something that a blind person could see, but you may as well be speaking in Swahili for all the sense it makes to him." Number one, we have blind spots because of the way we are made. Here's the second thing. Now, lots of you, at least when we begin, will have seen this. The way we look at things. Again, we're looking in the physical realm, but saying that there are spiritual applications of this. You see, we get used to seeing things a certain way. Doctrine, theology, our opinions, how we relate. We just view things in a certain way. Now, many of you will have seen the first of these. But if you haven't seen this, please don't feel embarrassed. I'm thrilled for you. That you're the person or you're the people that this is for. Right? How many of you have not seen that before? If you put your hands up. If you don't put your hands up, I will assume you've seen it before, so I'll start asking you lots of questions. So how many of you have not seen that before? Okay, that's about half of you. All right, only those who've not seen it before, when you think you know what that is, and you're not stupid, there's a point to this, just put your hand up and say, "This is what I can see." All right? So those of you who've never seen it before, what do you see there? Yep. An old lady. You sure? No. Okay, I mean, would you mind describing her? Tell me where you see an old lady.
She has like a feather, like a thing on top of her head, kind of like a hood.
Yep.
Like there's hair and like I think that's her face, but it could be a fruit. I think it's her face.
Has she got a ginormous nose?
Yeah.
And a kind of a quite bitter-looking mouth?
Yeah.
All right, how many of those who've never seen this before can see an old lady? If you'd put your hands up, please. All right? Any of you who've never seen it before see something different? Yeah, right at the back. A young woman. Okay. Could you describe the young woman for me, please?
She's kind of looking away, and the old woman's nose is her jawline.
Okay. And what about the old woman's mouth? Yeah, okay, like a necklace. All right. What I want you to do, please, if you can only see one of those, you can't see two, and you're not stupid, please just put your hands up, all right? If you can only see one of them. All right, what I'd like you to do, just for a few minutes, is talk to the people next to you who can see both of them and get them to explain to you how they can see two. All right, go for it. Okay, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, please don't be embarrassed. How many of you still can only see one? All right. At least you guys are being honest, because often people say, no, now I can see two. Whoa, now I can see two, whoa, yes. When I was about your age, and I wish I had some of these with me, I don't know what they're called, and I don't know if they're still around, but they just look like a load of spots. Do you remember those things? And you look at them, and this must be telling you something about the way I'm hardwired. I could never see what you're supposed to see. They were saying to me, you've got to let your eyes go out of focus. So I'd take my glasses off, I'm looking spots. They say, no, the way to do it is to get somebody to hold it up outside a window, and you look. So I'd get my wife outside, spots. And then they would say, but if you let your eyes go out of focus outside the window, spots. I never ever saw anything but flipping spots because of the way I was looking at things. Let me show you this one, then we'll have a 10-minute break. Okay, there is not the most attractive old lady you've ever seen in your life. It's not as good as the other one, this, but if you turn it upside down, you have this ugly-looking young woman, so... I wonder if you would entertain the idea that the way you look at life and the way you make decisions and the way you figure out theology is all about that, the way you've been trained to look at things. Some people call those worldviews, other people call them paradigms. You never suspect that the way you look at something is not the way that everybody else looks at it until you move outside your own culture. I remember one time being in Colorado, and my wife and I were going to fly back, and my daughter Abby, we were going to fly back to the UK, and it was a Thursday morning. And we go to Denver Airport, and as we're getting near to the airport, it's obvious something's wrong because all the roads are jammed up and stuff. When we get on the airport, it's a nightmare. You go to the check-ins, they're flashing, postponed, cancelled, and all the rest of it. And there are hundreds of people milling around. And then they have this thing playing over the loudspeaker system. If you want to talk to somebody about rebooking, please go and pick up a red telephone. So I go and pick up this red telephone, and there's this gal who's obviously highly trained in speaking to people who are all stressed out and stuff. And I said to her, look, it's really important that I get back to England. And she said, yes, sir, I appreciate that, and I apologize for the weather conditions, but look around the airport, it's not going to happen. And I kind of made some token response, trying to get her to make a decision. Zero, nothing. She said, the first time we can get you home is Tuesday at the earliest. I said, okay, thanks. I put the phone down. I go to the couple that we're staying with. And this guy is an entrepreneurial wheeler-dealer American. He's just a great guy. He knows I tell this story about him. He's fantastic. And I said to him, Rick, bad news, you've got us till next Tuesday. And he says, what? I said, till next Tuesday. He said, I don't think so. And he marches off. I'm thinking, what's going on? So I'm marching away behind him. He goes up to United Airlines to the executive business desk. And there's nobody. All the other places, there are long, long queues. There's nobody queuing up there. And there's a guy behind the counter, really nice suit, etc. I just feel like hiding because we have not got a business class ticket. We have got a bog standard kind of, it wasn't, but EasyJet style thing, you know, hope you get a seat. If you don't, good luck, jump on the back kind of thing. And I thought we shouldn't even be at this counter. And Rick says, could I introduce you to the Reverend Rob Whittaker? I'm thinking, who's he talking about? Oh, me, right, okay. He said, this man is an internationally renowned speaker. I'm thinking, what? And he said, it's absolutely critical that he gets home for a major appointment on Saturday morning. The major appointment on Saturday morning was Nether Kellett Congregational Church, right? Now, you know, our cameraman used to go there. They're lovely folk. I love them. But they themselves would say, you know, on a great day with a following wind, if revival broke out, we might have about 25 folk. So, you know, when he's saying he's got to get to this major meeting, I want to die, I want to crawl under the counter. And the guy says to him, sir, there's nothing I can do. Look, all the flights are cancelled. And Rick says to him, there's always something that you can do. He says, like what? Rick says, well, you could, United, because that's who we had a ticket with, could pay for any other airline who can get him back. He said, oh, I can certainly do that. At which point I pull out these tickets and kind of shove them across and feel a bit embarrassed, and he shakes his head and stamps them and signs. Rick then marches down to British Airways, which is closed up. There's nobody there. I kiddeth thee not, he climbs over the counter. And he goes to a door that says staff, private, bangs on the door and marches in. And all the cabin crew and folk are sitting there and, you know, drinking coffee and smoking and stuff. And he gives them the same spiel. And he gets us put on the top of the standby list. Then he marches up to Air Canada, and says, could you get this family back to England, even if it's an indirect route? And they said, oh, sure. If he's prepared to go, you know, a number of things, that's fine. He got us back home via Calgary, and we arrived back about 2.5 hours after it would have been if we'd been on the original flight. Question, don't want you to shout out, who was the most spiritual, me or Rick? Actually, the question is nothing to do with spirituality. It's to do with worldview. It's to do with how you see things. And here's me, brought up in a little house. My dad was unemployed a fair bit of the time, etc. We struggled. I wouldn't say boo to a goose. Here's Rick, this entrepreneurial guy. We both look at the same situation, but look at it completely differently. Just imagine a church full of Ricks would be very different than a church full of Robs. A movement headed up by Rick would be very different than a movement headed up by Rob. This thing about blind spots is really, really, really important. You have them and I have them. Number one, because of your DNA, how you're made. Number two, because of your programming, how you've been raised to look at things. Okay, 10 to 8, 50-minute lecture gone. Let's have a 10-minute break. You guys at home can go and put the kettle on, have a cup of tea or coffee or whatever, and we'll be back at 8 o'clock. Okay, thank you.